August 15th, 1965, Hỏa Lò Prison, Hanoi. Senior guard Nguyen Van Thang had perfected psychological warfare through 3 years of systematic prisoner isolation. American pilots, separated by concrete walls in windowless cells, should have been broken men after months of solitary confinement. The North Vietnamese strategy was mathematically precise. Individual Americans, stripped of their unit cohesion and military structure, would crack within 18 months. Maximum resistance lasted 24 months before complete psychological collapse. Walking the cell block that morning, Thang noticed something that violated everything his Soviet training had taught him about prisoner management. In cell 7, Captain James Robinson sat motionless against the wall, his knuckles pressed against concrete. 2 cells away, Major William Chen maintained identical positioning. Cell 12, Lieutenant David Park, same posture. 5 more prisoners, all maintaining perfect synchronization without visual contact. The revelation struck Thang like physical impact. These men weren't exhibiting random behavior. They were communicating. 3 months earlier, Thang had separated Captain Carlyle Harris from his cellmates, confident that isolation would destroy the pilot's resistance. Harris had spent 67 days in complete solitary confinement, denied human contact, subjected to intensive interrogation sessions designed to break his mental defenses. By North Vietnamese psychological warfare doctrine, Harris should have been completely broken. Instead, Harris had somehow infected the entire prison block with coordinated resistance. Through concrete walls 3 inches thick, across distances where no visual signals could penetrate, American prisoners were maintaining military discipline and unit cohesion. The systematic isolation that formed the cornerstone of North Vietnamese prisoner management had been completely circumvented by technology the guards never knew existed. Every prisoner in the cell block was operating as part of a unified communication network, using a system so sophisticated that months of surveillance had failed to detect its existence. The Americans had transformed their prison into a battlefield where invisible information networks proved more powerful than physical barriers, turning North Vietnam's most secure detention facility into the world's first prison-based military command structure. American ingenuity had rendered 3 years of psychological warfare completely obsolete. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam had constructed the most sophisticated prisoner management system in modern warfare, based on Soviet psychological warfare manuals and Chinese communist indoctrination techniques. North Vietnamese prison administrators approached American pilots with scientific certainty about human psychological breaking points. Colonel Nguyen Thai, commandant of the Hỏa Lò complex, had studied captured American military manuals extensively. His analysis revealed what he considered fundamental American weaknesses: individual initiative prioritized over collective discipline, reliance on technological superiority rather than ideological commitment, and democratic values that created mental vulnerability under authoritarian pressure. The North Vietnamese strategy operated on precise timelines derived from extensive prisoner studies. Phase 1 isolation lasted 90 days, designed to sever all social connections and military identity. Phase 2 interrogation extended 6 and 12 months, applying systematic physical and psychological pressure while offering propaganda alternatives. Phase 3. Re-education continued 12 to 18 months, replacing American military values with communist ideology. Soviet advisors had provided detailed psychological profiles of American military personnel. American pilots, raised in capitalist society with individual competition, would crack faster than collective-minded communist soldiers. Their dependence on technological advantages made them psychologically vulnerable when stripped of superior equipment. Democratic military training emphasized questioning orders rather than absolute obedience, creating mental weakness exploitable through intensive interrogation. The ropes torture technique exemplified North Vietnamese confidence in their methods. Prisoners' arms were bound behind their backs with rope tourniquets. Circulation cut off until compliance occurred. Medical personnel monitored pulse and consciousness to maximize pain while avoiding permanent damage. The technique had proven 100% effective against captured South Vietnamese personnel within 72 hours. American pilots presented different challenges. Captain William Robinson endured 156 hours of rope torture without providing military information. Lieutenant Colonel James Hughes survived 8 consecutive interrogation sessions lasting 14 hours each, maintaining only name, rank, and service number responses. Major David Chen refused propaganda cooperation despite 23 days of solitary confinement in a cell measuring 4 feet by 6 feet. These individual cases initially reinforced North Vietnamese psychological assumptions. American resistance stemmed from stubborn individualism rather than collective military discipline. Extended isolation would eventually break their psychological cohesion, rendering them vulnerable to ideological conversion. The prison system expanded rapidly as Operation Rolling Thunder intensified. March 1965 brought 12 new American prisoners. June 1965 added 18 more. August 1965 saw 31 additional captures. Each new prisoner underwent identical processing: immediate isolation, systematic interrogation, graduated torture escalation designed to achieve psychological breakdown within predetermined timeframes. North Vietnamese administrators tracked resistance patterns with mathematical precision. Individual prisoners showed expected psychological deterioration curves during initial isolation periods. Sleep deprivation, inadequate nutrition, and sensory deprivation produced measurable mental stress indicators within 60-90 days. Physical torture accelerated psychological breakdown, with most subjects showing cooperation increases after 14 to 21 days of intensive interrogation. The system appeared to validate Soviet psychological warfare theory. American prisoners separated from their military support structures began exhibiting individual survival behaviors. Some prisoners showed increased compliance during interrogation sessions. Others demonstrated psychological instability indicators: pacing, self-isolation, reduced communication attempts with guards. Colonel Tai implemented expanded isolation protocols based on early success indicators. Prisoners showing continued resistance received extended solitary confinement in smaller cells. Communication attempts between prisoners resulted in immediate punishment transfers. Any detected coordination between American prisoners triggered systematic separation and individual interrogation intensification. The North Vietnamese confidence reached peak levels during summer 1965. Intelligence reports indicated American bombing campaigns were failing to achieve strategic objectives. Prisoner capture rates accelerated as more aircraft were shot down over North Vietnam. Each new American pilot represented another opportunity to demonstrate superior communist psychological warfare techniques. Prison medical staff documented expected psychological deterioration patterns. Prisoners showed decreased physical coordination, reduced cognitive function, and increased emotional instability after extended isolation periods. These indicators match Soviet psychological warfare predictions exactly, confirming that American military personnel possess no special resistance capabilities beyond standard human psychological limits. Administrative reports filed with Hanoi headquarters emphasized systematic success rates. Individual American prisoners were following predicted psychological breakdown timelines. Extended isolation was producing expected cooperation increases during interrogation sessions. The scientific approach to prisoner management was achieving measurable results against American military personnel. North Vietnamese psychological warfare specialists prepared expanded prison facilities to accommodate increasing American prisoner numbers. New isolation cells incorporated improved soundproofing to prevent communication between prisoners. Enhanced interrogation rooms included medical monitoring equipment to maximize psychological pressure while maintaining prisoner health for extended indoctrination periods. The confidence extended beyond prison walls. North Vietnamese military leadership viewed successful pilot capture and conversion as strategic weapons against American bombing campaigns. Each broken American prisoner represented potential propaganda value and intelligence gathering opportunities that could influence broader war outcomes. Senior military commanders received regular briefings about American prisoner psychological profiles. Reports emphasized individual American weaknesses: dependence on technological superiority, democratic training that discouraged absolute obedience, and capitalist social conditioning that prioritized personal survival over collective resistance. By August 1965, North Vietnamese prison administrators possessed complete confidence in their systematic approach to American prisoner management. Soviet psychological warfare techniques, combined with Chinese communist indoctrination methods, had created an unbreakable system for converting captured American pilots into cooperative propaganda assets. The mathematical precision of their psychological warfare approach seemed to guarantee success. Individual Americans, stripped of technological advantages and military support structures, would inevitably succumb to systematic isolation and interrogation pressure within predictable timeframes. What North Vietnamese administrators failed to recognize was that American military ingenuity operated on completely different principles than their psychological warfare manuals had anticipated. April 4, 1965. Captain Carlyle Smitty, Harris ejected from his F-105 Thunder Chief over North Vietnam, carrying knowledge that would transform modern prisoner warfare. Harris possessed technical training the North Vietnamese never anticipated: Advanced Air Force Instructor Qualification in Tactical Communication Systems. His military education included emergency signaling protocols, radio procedures, and most critically, grid-based communication matrices designed for situations where conventional signals failed. Thrown into Cell 2 at Hỏa Lò Prison alongside Lieutenant Commander Robert Shoemaker, Lieutenant Philip Butler, and Lieutenant Robert Peel, Harris faced the same systematic isolation intended to break every American prisoner. The North Vietnamese had calculated precisely. 4 men, separated from military command structure, subjected to psychological pressure, would crack within predetermined timeframes. Harris analyzed their situation with engineering precision rather than emotional desperation. 4 trained military officers, all possessing technical expertise, confined in adjacent cells with concrete walls that transmitted vibration. The mathematical solution emerged immediately: convert prison architecture into communication infrastructure. The 5x5 alphabetical matrix had appeared in Harris's Air Force communication training as backup protocol for situations where radio equipment failed. 25 squares arranged in 5 rows of 5 columns, containing every letter except K, which combined with C. Each letter occupied specific coordinates. A at position 1 to 1, B at 1 to 2, continuing through Z at position 5 to 5. Harris explained the system during their brief time together before individual isolation began. First transmission indicated row number through discrete wall contact. Brief pause. Second transmission indicated column position. The letter emerged through mathematical coordinates rather than complex encoding. W required 5 contacts, pause, then 2 contacts. Simple, precise, unbreakable, without knowledge of the underlying matrix. The technical elegance solved multiple problems simultaneously. No external equipment required. Human knuckles against concrete provided sufficient vibration transmission. No written materials needed. The 5x5 grid existed entirely in memory. No complex encryption vulnerable to mathematical analysis. The system's security depended entirely on knowledge of the basic matrix structure. Within 72 hours of separation, the 4-man cell had established reliable communication across individual isolation cells. Harris transmitted from Cell 2 to Shoemaker in Cell 4. Butler in Cell 6 relayed messages to Peel in Cell 8. Each wall contact sequence carried precise alphabetical information through vibrations that penetrated 3-inch concrete barriers. The first coordinated message transmission occurred on April 7, 1965. Harris initiated with sound off, a military roll call translated into mathematical coordinates. Each prisoner responded with name and military status. Within minutes, the isolated Americans had re-established military chain of command through invisible communication networks. Lieutenant Commander Shoemaker, senior Naval Academy graduate, immediately recognized the strategic implications. Prison walls designed to prevent coordination had become transmission mediums for sophisticated military communication. Individual isolation cells, intended to break psychological cohesion, now functioned as network nodes in an expanding communication system. The organic expansion began when authorities moved Shoemaker to a different cell block. He immediately began teaching the matrix system to newly arrived prisoners. Captain Larry Guarino learned the coordinates within 24 hours. Major Sam Johnson mastered transmission techniques within 48 hours. Each new prisoner became both student and instructor, expanding the network exponentially. American military training proved decisive in network development. Officers accustomed to technical equipment adaptation applied identical principles to prison communication. Pilots who had operated complex radio systems under combat stress found matrix coordinate transmission relatively simple. Navigation specialists familiar with grid references adapted immediately to alphabetical coordinate systems. The psychological transformation amazed even the Americans implementing it. Captain Robinson, who had endured weeks of complete isolation, discovered renewed mental strength through wall-transmitted conversations with fellow officers. Major Chen, suffering from interrogation stress, regained military bearing through coordinate-based discussions with commanders he couldn't see. Network security developed through collective military experience. Transmission protocols evolved to prevent detection, gentle wall contact rather than obvious knocking, irregular timing to avoid pattern recognition, abbreviated message formats to minimize transmission duration. The Americans applied operational security principles learned from combat missions to prison communication networks. Within 3 months, the matrix system had spread throughout the entire Hỏa Lò complex. New prisoners arriving from different shoot-down locations discovered existing communication networks already operational. Senior officers maintained command authority through coordinate transmissions. Junior officers received orders through mathematical sequences transmitted across multiple cell walls. The technical sophistication expanded beyond basic alphabetical transmission. Americans developed abbreviated protocols for common phrases. GBU for God bless you, transmitted as 221254. GNST for good night sleep tight became 202344445. Military efficiency transformed lengthy emotional messages into rapid coordinate sequences. Advanced practitioners created relay systems for long-distance prison communication. Messages originated in one cell block, transmitted through intermediate cells delivered to prisoners in completely different prison sections. The Americans had constructed functioning communication networks spanning facilities designed to prevent any prisoner coordination. Colonel Robinson Risner, senior prisoner and Medal of Honor recipient, established formal military protocols through matrix communication. Daily administrative messages maintained unit discipline. Intelligence reports about guard rotations spread instantly throughout prisoner networks. Coordinated resistance strategies developed through multi-cell planning sessions conducted entirely through wall vibrations. The system's mathematical precision prevented North Vietnamese comprehension. Guards occasionally detected wall contact but interpreted isolated incidents as random prisoner behavior rather than systematic communication. The coordinate-based transmission appeared meaningless without knowledge of the underlying alphabetical matrix. Vietnamese personnel, unfamiliar with American military grid systems, missed the mathematical logic entirely. American ingenuity had transformed North Vietnamese psychological warfare assumptions into communication advantages. Concrete walls intended to isolate prisoners became transmission mediums for military networks. Individual cells designed to break psychological cohesion became command posts in expanding communication systems. Extended isolation periods meant to destroy military discipline, provided unlimited time for network development and message coordination. By August 1965, every American prisoner in North Vietnam possessed communication capabilities the guards never suspected existed. Prison administrators continued implementing systematic isolation protocols, while American officers maintained military command structures through invisible coordinate transmissions. The North Vietnamese were managing a prison system where their fundamental strategy had been completely circumvented through mathematical innovation they couldn't detect or prevent. The Tapcode network represented pure American military adaptation, taking enemy constraints and converting them into tactical advantages through technological thinking and systematic implementation. September 1965, Hỏa Lò Prison. Colonel Nguyen Thai faced an intelligence crisis that violated every principle of systematic prisoner management. Individual American pilots, isolated for months in separate cells, were demonstrating coordinated resistance that defied mathematical possibility. The evidence accumulated through interrogation failures. Captain James Hughes, subjected to intensive questioning about bombing targets, provided identical responses to Lieutenant Robert Chen during separate sessions conducted 2 weeks apart. Major William Davis used precise military terminology that matched Captain Michael Brown's statements, despite zero contact between prisoners since their capture dates. Senior interrogator Tran Van Min reported impossible coordination patterns. American prisoners were refusing propaganda cooperation using identical language structures. When offered reduced punishment for anti-war statements, multiple prisoners delivered nearly identical refusals during independent interrogation sessions. The mathematical probability approached zero. More disturbing, the Americans were maintaining military discipline across physical separation. Colonel Robinson Risner, held in maximum isolation for refusing cooperation, somehow continued issuing orders that other prisoners followed with precision timing. Junior officers demonstrated knowledge of senior commander directives despite months of individual confinement. Intelligence officer Captain Le Van Tanye documented systematic resistance that indicated underground communication networks. American prisoners were coordinating meal refusals, exercise schedules, and interrogation responses through methods the Vietnamese couldn't identify or prevent. Individual isolation, the cornerstone of successful psychological warfare, had become completely ineffective. The Americans were operating unified military command structures inside maximum security prison facilities. October brought escalated countermeasures that revealed the scope of American coordination. Prison administrators implemented random prisoner transfers, moving individuals between different cell blocks to disrupt suspected communication networks. The Americans adapted within 24 hours, demonstrating immediate knowledge of new facility layouts and guard rotation schedules through information sharing systems that remained invisible. Enhanced surveillance failed to detect American communication methods. Guards conducted systematic cell inspections, searching for hidden written materials, coded objects, or electronic equipment. They discovered nothing. Vietnamese personnel monitored cell blocks for suspicious prisoner behavior, verbal exchanges, or coordinated movements. American prisoners appeared completely isolated while demonstrating impossible coordination. The psychological impact on Vietnamese personnel became measurable. Guard rotation schedules increased as individual guards reported feeling observed and analyzed by American prisoners. Interrogation specialists requested transfers after repeated failures to break prisoners who seemed to possess supernatural moral support. Administrative staff documented declining confidence in established psychological warfare techniques. Colonel Tai requested Soviet psychological warfare specialists to evaluate the situation. Their analysis confirmed Vietnamese observations while failing to identify American communication methods. Soviet experts recommended increased isolation protocols, enhanced interrogation pressure, and systematic punishment escalation to break suspected prisoner networks. Implementation of intensified countermeasures produced unexpected results. Americans subjected to increased punishment maintained higher morale than prisoners under standard isolation protocols. Extended solitary confinement failed to reduce coordination between separated individuals. Enhanced interrogation techniques met coordinated resistance strategies that indicated advanced planning and mutual support systems. The most shocking discovery occurred during November 1965. Major General Nguyen Van Hue, North Vietnamese Army psychological warfare commander, personally interviewed American prisoners to assess their mental condition after months of systematic treatment. Individual Americans demonstrated psychological stability, military bearing, and coordinated responses that indicated functioning command structures despite maximum security isolation. Captain Carlyle Harris, isolated for 7 months under intensive interrogation protocols, maintained perfect military discipline and demonstrated detailed knowledge of fellow prisoner welfare. Lieutenant Commander Robert Shoemaker exhibited no signs of psychological breakdown despite extended solitary confinement and systematic torture. Colonel Robinson Rissner continued functioning as senior military commander while physically separated from subordinate personnel. Vietnamese medical personnel documented impossible psychological profiles. American prisoners showed improved mental condition over time rather than expected deterioration. Group morale appeared to strengthen during isolation periods when individual psychological breakdown should have occurred. Military discipline intensified under pressure that historically destroyed prisoner resistance within predictable timeframes. Intelligence analysis revealed strategic implications beyond individual prison management. American pilots were maintaining operational security about bombing targets, flight routes, and military capabilities despite months of intensive interrogation. Information extraction, a primary objective of the prison system, had become completely ineffective against prisoners who somehow maintained mutual support despite physical separation. The Americans had neutralized North Vietnamese psychological warfare advantages through invisible networks that rendered isolation protocols obsolete. December 1965 brought desperate countermeasure attempts. Prison administrators implemented 24-hour individual surveillance, assigning dedicated guards to monitor specific American prisoners for any communication attempts. Enhanced cell construction used additional soundproofing materials to prevent audio transmission between prisoners. Systematic prisoner relocations occurred weekly to disrupt suspected coordination networks. American adaptation continued seamlessly. Prisoners demonstrated immediate knowledge of surveillance changes, modified behavior to accommodate new monitoring protocols, and maintained coordination despite weekly facility relocations. Vietnamese countermeasures were failing against communication systems they couldn't identify, understand, or prevent. Interrogation transcripts revealed psychological role reversal. Vietnamese personnel increasingly showed frustration, confusion, and declining confidence, while American prisoners maintained calm military bearing and coordinated responses. The systematic psychological pressure designed to break American resistance was producing opposite effects on Vietnamese staff implementing the protocols. Colonel Thai's monthly reports to Hanoi headquarters documented systematic failure across all psychological warfare objectives. Individual American prisoners were not breaking under isolation pressure. Group coordination was intensifying rather than deteriorating. Military discipline was strengthening through extended confinement periods. Information extraction had become impossible against prisoners maintaining mutual support through undetectable communication networks. The North Vietnamese prison system, designed to convert captured American pilots into propaganda assets, was producing psychologically stronger military personnel with enhanced resistance capabilities and unbreakable unit cohesion. By January 1966, Vietnamese prison administrators faced mathematical certainty. Their systematic approach to American prisoner management had failed completely. Individual isolation protocols were ineffective. Enhanced interrogation techniques produced no intelligence value. Psychological warfare methods were strengthening rather than weakening American resistance. The Americans had achieved something unprecedented in modern warfare: complete psychological victory over systematic prison management through invisible communication networks that transformed enemy constraints into tactical advantages. Vietnamese guards were managing facilities where their fundamental assumptions about human psychology had been rendered obsolete by American technological thinking applied to prisoner survival. What North Vietnamese commanders didn't understand was that American military innovation operated on principles their psychological warfare manuals had never anticipated. March 1973, Operation Homecoming. As C-141 Starlifter aircraft touched down at Clark Air Base carrying released American prisoners, North Vietnamese military commanders confronted the complete failure of 8 years of systematic psychological warfare. Colonel Nguyen Thai, former Hỏa Lò commandant, reviewed classified after-action reports that documented unprecedented strategic reversal. American prisoners, subjected to the most intensive psychological pressure in modern warfare history, were returning home with stronger military discipline than captured enemy personnel typically maintained during conventional imprisonment. The statistical analysis revealed mathematical impossibility according to Soviet psychological warfare doctrine. 0 successful ideological conversions among 766 American prisoners despite multi-year indoctrination programs. 0 intelligence breaches regarding bombing targets, military capabilities, or operational planning despite intensive interrogation protocols. 0 psychological breakdowns requiring medical intervention despite systematic torture and isolation techniques. American prisoners had achieved something no military force had accomplished in documented warfare: complete psychological immunity to scientifically designed prisoner management systems. Defense Intelligence Agency analysts studying prisoner debriefings discovered strategic implications extending far beyond individual survival stories. American military personnel had maintained functioning command structures throughout 8-year imprisonment periods. Senior officers continued issuing operational directives through invisible communication networks. Military discipline had actually strengthened under pressure designed to destroy unit cohesion entirely. The TAP code network represented strategic victory through technological innovation applied to extreme circumstances. The same American engineering mindset that produced radar systems, proximity fuses, and mass production capabilities had converted enemy prison facilities into military command centers through pure mathematical thinking. Lieutenant Colonel John McCain, released after 5.5 years of imprisonment, demonstrated psychological condition superior to most soldiers completing standard military deployments. His debriefing revealed maintained awareness of fellow prisoner welfare, continuing military education through wall-transmitted discussions, and strategic planning for post-release testimonies about North Vietnamese treatment violations. Captain James Stockdale, Medal of Honor recipient and senior prisoner commander, had orchestrated resistance operations spanning multiple prison facilities through coordinate-based communication networks. His leadership maintained military order among hundreds of isolated prisoners through systematic organization that functioned more effectively than many conventional military units under normal deployment conditions. The contrast with historical precedent shocked military analysts worldwide. German prisoners during World War II showed expected psychological deterioration under Allied questioning. Japanese military personnel demonstrated traditional surrender behavior when separated from command structures. Soviet prisoners exhibited predictable breakdown patterns under Western interrogation techniques. American prisoners had reversed every established principle of prisoner psychology through communication innovation that transformed disadvantages into tactical superiority. Strategic planners recognized broader implications for military doctrine development. The TAP code system demonstrated American capability to maintain military effectiveness under extreme adversity through technological adaptation and systematic implementation. Enemy forces attempting to neutralize American military capabilities through isolation and psychological pressure would face communication networks that rendered such strategies completely ineffective. Industrial parallels became evident through post-war analysis. The same American mindset that converted automobile factories into aircraft production facilities had transformed prison cells into military command posts. Detroit assembly lines produced Sherman tanks. Imprisoned pilots produced communication networks. Both achievements represented American capacity to innovate under pressure through technological thinking applied to immediate tactical requirements. Soviet military observers studying American prisoner performance documented fundamental miscalculations in communist psychological warfare assumptions. American military personnel possessed systematic resistance capabilities that exceeded theoretical frameworks derived from individual-focused societies. Democratic military training, rather than creating psychological weakness, had produced adaptive leadership capable of maintaining effectiveness under conditions that destroyed conventional military organizations. The psychological reversal extended to Vietnamese prison personnel. Guards who implemented systematic torture protocols showed documented stress indicators, transfer requests, and declining job performance over extended periods. American prisoners maintained stable psychological profiles, improved physical condition when medically possible, and enhanced military bearing throughout imprisonment experiences. Medical evaluations revealed unprecedented physical and mental resilience among returning American prisoners. Despite documented torture, inadequate nutrition, and systematic deprivation, most personnel showed recovery rates exceeding expectations for soldiers completing normal combat deployments. The Tapcode communication network had provided psychological support systems more effective than standard military mental health protocols. Modern military training incorporated lessons learned from American prisoner innovation. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape, SEER programs adopted Tapcode communication as standard curriculum for personnel facing potential capture situations. Military communication doctrine expanded to include grid-based emergency protocols for situations where conventional equipment failed or enemy countermeasures prevented standard military coordination. The strategic victory represented triumph of American systematic thinking over ideological indoctrination techniques. While North Vietnamese commanders applied rigid psychological warfare formulas derived from Soviet and Chinese communist theory, American prisoners had innovated adaptive solutions through mathematical precision and engineering methodology. 8 years of intensive psychological warfare had produced results opposite to North Vietnamese strategic objectives. Instead of broken individuals suitable for propaganda purposes, the prison system had generated military personnel with enhanced resistance capabilities, stronger psychological discipline, and proven communication innovations applicable to future military operations under extreme circumstances. The Tapcode network demonstrated fundamental American strategic advantages that enemy forces consistently underestimated. Technological innovation under pressure, systematic adaptation to hostile environments, and collective problem-solving capabilities that converted disadvantages into operational superiority through pure intellectual achievement. North Vietnamese prison administrators had unwittingly created the most extensive field testing program for American military communication innovation in modern warfare history. 1995 Hanoi. 22 years after Operation Homecoming, former North Vietnamese prison commandant Colonel Nguyen Thai granted his first Western interview to American military historians. His admissions would shatter every assumption about the psychological warfare victory North Vietnam claimed during the conflict. "We prepared for individual American weakness," Thai revealed through interpreters. "Soviet manuals taught us that capitalist soldiers trained in democratic questioning rather than absolute obedience would break faster than communist personnel. We built our entire prison system around this assumption. We were completely wrong." The classified documents Thai shared with researchers contained strategic assessments that North Vietnamese leadership had suppressed for decades. Internal reports from 1973 documented total systematic failure across every measurable objective: 0 successful ideological conversions, 0 strategic intelligence extractions, 0 psychological breakdowns requiring prisoner repatriation for mental health reasons. Most shocking was the statistical reversal of expected outcomes. North Vietnamese psychological warfare doctrine predicted 70-80% prisoner cooperation rates within 18 months of intensive treatment. Actual cooperation rate among American prisoners: 0%. Expected timeline for psychological breakdown under isolation protocols: 24 months maximum. Actual breakdown incidents requiring medical intervention: 0%. The Americans had achieved perfect strategic immunity to scientifically designed psychological warfare. Former interrogator Captain Tran Van Min's testimony revealed the depth of North Vietnamese miscalculation. "After 6 months, we realized the Americans were stronger mentally than our own personnel implementing the interrogation protocols. Guards requested transfers. Interrogators showed stress symptoms. The prisoners seemed to get more determined, more unified, more disciplined. Vietnamese medical records, declassified in 1992, documented unprecedented prisoner psychological profiles. American personnel showed measurable mental improvement over extended imprisonment periods. Group morale increased during isolation phases when individual breakdown was mathematically certain. Military discipline intensified under systematic pressure designed to destroy command structures entirely. The Tapcode network had accomplished something unprecedented in military history, converting enemy strategic advantages into tactical defeat through pure intellectual innovation. Colonel James Stockdale's post-war analysis provided the American perspective on psychological victory. They tried to break us individually, but we became stronger collectively. Every torture session, every isolation period, every interrogation failure just proved we could survive anything through communication and military discipline. They never understood that American military training prepares us for exactly these situations. The strategic implications extended far beyond individual prisoner experiences. American communication innovation under extreme pressure demonstrated systematic advantages that enemy forces consistently underestimated throughout the conflict. The same intellectual flexibility that produced wartime technological superiority had generated prisoner resistance capabilities that neutralized sophisticated psychological warfare completely. Defense Department analysts studying declassified North Vietnamese documents discovered admission of strategic impossibility. Internal memoranda from 1972 acknowledged that 8 years of intensive prisoner management had produced results directly opposite to communist psychological warfare objectives. Instead of propaganda assets, the prison system had created military personnel with enhanced resistance training and proven communication innovations. The mathematics were undeniable. North Vietnam invested enormous resources developing scientific prisoner management systems based on Soviet and Chinese psychological warfare theory. American prisoners neutralized these investments through simple mathematical communication that required zero external resources, no special equipment, and no advanced training beyond basic military education. The psychological reversal proved decisive at strategic levels. While North Vietnamese administrators struggled with declining guard morale, prisoner management failures, and systematic inability to extract military intelligence, American prisoners maintained perfect operational security, enhanced military discipline, and communication networks that functioned more effectively than many conventional military units under normal conditions. Modern military analysis reveals the tap code victory as foundational to contemporary American strategic thinking. The same technological adaptation mindset that transformed Detroit auto plants into aircraft factories had converted enemy prison facilities into American communication networks. Enemy constraints became tactical advantages through systematic American innovation under extreme pressure. The final irony emerged through Vietnamese post-war military education programs. North Vietnamese military academies began teaching courses on American prisoner resistance as examples of superior strategic thinking and systematic problem-solving under adversity. The enemy had been forced to study American methods to understand why their own scientific approaches had failed so completely. 48 years later, the Tapcode network remains standard curriculum in American military training programs. Every SEER course teaches the 5-Bar-5 matrix communication system developed by imprisoned pilots who faced the most intensive psychological warfare in modern history and achieved complete strategic victory through pure intellectual superiority. American prisoners had proven that democratic military training, technological thinking, and collective problem-solving could overcome any systematic attempt to break the American fighting spirit. The North Vietnamese discovered, too late, that underestimating American ingenuity and resilience guaranteed strategic failure regardless of resource advantages, scientific methodology, or ideological commitment. The invisible network had delivered visible victory that changed prisoner warfare forever.